You know how to hold it all together, but when it comes to your relationships, something's always missing. Welcome to Emotionally Wealthy, a podcast for high achievers who are ready to trade emotional disconnection for clarity, fulfillment, and relationships that are nourishing, not draining. I'm your host, Karen Conlon, licensed therapist, transformational coach, and your guide in turning insight into action. Are you ready for it? Let's do this. Welcome, everyone, once again to the Emotionally Wealthy podcast. I'm Karen Conlon, your host, and I am incredibly excited today because we are joined by Wes Kennedy. Wes Kennedy is a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in trauma. He is a speaker, a coach, and a songwriter whose work centers on emotional freedom, self-leadership, and becoming fully alive. Wes is the founder of Solid Soul Coaching, and he's also the creator of Emotional Freedom Framework, which is a practical model used for understanding emotional patterns and creating lasting change. So today's conversation, everyone, will be about emotional freedom, avoidance patterns, and the quiet cost of staying safe. We're also going to explore how unresolved trauma and shame shape high performance and why emotions are not our enemies, but rather they are messengers. Wes, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Emotionally Wealthy.
Thank you. You're very kind, Karen. It's an honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to talking today.
I am so glad you're here. One of the things that I always ask my guests when they come on board is to tell us a little bit about themselves before they became who they became today. So if you could give me a little bit of background and just start with you, your story, and maybe what brought you here.
Yeah, for sure. So I was a kid who externally did well most of the time. We have a lot of these individuals in our lives who seem like things are going just fine. The grades are okay. I got into music pretty early on. I grew up with an older brother who played a lot of soccer, so I was in soccer as well, and everything went pretty well. I was athletic enough. I was musical enough. I got decent grades, and yet as well as I did on the outside, I just felt like I was continually hitting the same wall on the inside. And I didn't have language for it. I couldn't explain it, but I would get these fits of rage and anger.
Mm.
Of course, when you're doing well in sports or musically or academically, you've got this great picture that you're presenting to the world. And yet when I would have these moments of outrage, whether it was at like literally at recess playing soccer or football, or elsewhere in my life, it just like shattered it. It was really embarrassing. It was really embarrassing. So I felt like I had this tension for so long. In fact, I remember in middle school, I was playing on the B team. I went to school with a lot of tall Dutch kids, and I never really made the A team in basketball. That wasn't really my sport. But like I said, I was athletic enough to make the B team and play with my friends. And after one of our games, we were shaking hands with the other team and doing the good game. I don't know why, but I thought, this other guy who fouled me in the game, like I'm gonna get him now. And sure enough, I like tried to like hit him in the side, which was totally unprofessional, totally uncalled for. And I mean, looking back, just super embarrassing. There were those moments of just like impulse and anger that really were in tension with this other sort of portrayal, I'll call it, going on in my life. And so um there wasn't a moment where I realized like, hey, I need to address this internal world. I just sensed it for years and years and years and didn't know what to do about it. So I tried to hide it and wrestle with it and all of that. And it led me to eventually helping people with their internal worlds as well. So
Yeah, I deeply feel what you're saying here. There's a saying of sorts that people who do this type of work are people who are also healing or gone through the process of healing
yeah,
themselves.
wounded healer.
And yes, that's right, wounded healers. And so, it's interesting to hear about how you started to discover these emotions because it sounds like you were playing sports. So there was an outlet, there was a physical outlet. You were expressing yourself musically as well. So I wonder if there's a myth to the whole, oh, boys just need to be outside playing and to be active. I ask you that because what I'm hearing actually is, I had these outlets and yet I was still unable to get rid of whatever it was. When you think back, knowing what you know now and having the insight that you have now, what was it that you were missing? Because according to conventional wisdom, you had what you needed, right? You had another older brother, you had sports, you had, all these other things. So what was missing?
Yeah, I think it all comes back to story. Our
Mm,
sense of story, both what's told to us and literally the generations that we come from, but also the meaning that we make in our present moment. And so someone can have all the protective factors in the world.
yeah,
On paper, that's, a two-parent home, that's supportive relationships, that's these opportunities like sports or music or other extracurriculars, even, early access to literacy or whatever these opportunities are. Someone can have all the protective factors in the world, and
yeah,
yet still, because of these little seeds planted either by others or by our own interpretation of our experience, still be struggling with this narrative, an
yeah,
unhelpful narrative. I mean, at the end of the day, for me, it comes back to, is our narrative helpful? Well, one, is it true? But second, is it helpful or unhelpful? I wouldn't have been able to understand this in seventh grade, but ultimately it came down to the story that I was telling myself about myself, and therefore what a silly little basketball game or a single play at recess during soccer actually meant in the context of my story.
yeah, yeah. Because a lot of times we're prescribed roles, we're prescribed labels. And then children have the tendency to kind of want to fit into those labels, right? And fit into those roles. If you say, oh, she is so funny or he's so athletic, there's this expectation of what you're supposed to be. And then we kind of fit into it or work towards fitting
Yeah,
into
for
it
sure.
without realizing that that's what we're doing. And this a lot of times then becomes a pattern, right? And I'm curious if that is something that happened for you. Um, the idea of, well, this is who I'm supposed to be, or this is what's expected of me. But then perhaps on some level, that clashing with who you really were inside. I'm wondering if there was a Wes that was still undiscovered or still that was there that wasn't really allowed to be there. I'm curious.
Yeah, you know what? Through the lens of going back to my younger self, I don't think it was as much sort of an authentic self that was repressed. It was definitely an immature self that was striving to not feel certain things or not look a certain way, and trying to use academics, music, sports. Even we were involved in church, even showing up at Sunday school and knowing the answers, winning the little prizes, trying to use those means to not feel a certain way, um, more than, sort of an existential, like authentic me that wasn't allowed to come out. I do think as humans we want to do well, and so spoken or unspoken, we learn in our family of origin what that looks like. And so even like in a toxic, really unhealthy, high abuse situation, people are going to learn, oh, I say this, I don't say this, I do this, I don't do this, because there's this desire inside to quote unquote do well, and that's going to be defined by the environment that we're in, regardless.
It's interesting that then you became a high achiever in many senses of the word, and then working later on with high performing and high achieving adults. I'm curious about your perspective about unresolved trauma and patterns. How do these unresolved things come up relationally for people when they're just kind of doing their thing, going about their day, but have this underlying psychological, emotional, heavy stuff, right? The stuff that's just really impacting them without realizing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, to be clear, when we think of trauma, we think of big categories of things that happen to people, like sexual abuse, like physical abuse, domestic violence, even like a experience of war or a natural disaster. These are things that happen to people, and we talk about it categorically. And for a lot of us, that's why we will conclude, "Oh, I have never experienced trauma." But the reality that took me a long time to learn is that trauma is less about what happens to us and more about what happens in us. And what I've noticed is that there have been patterns set in motion in my life because of a moment something happened deep within me. I was made to feel a certain way. And then I made the secret and deep commitment, oh, I never want to feel that way again. And the moment may not have registered as traumatic to anyone around me,
Yeah.
but yet something was stuck there. So trauma uh, is when we go into a response to perceived danger or perceived loss, and we get stuck there. Right now, most of the time in a given day, we can close the loop. Right, and we know, if I hear a loud noise, oh, there's someone dropped something on the ground, and the loop closes, and I come back to safety, and it's all good. I'm not stuck there. Trauma is when we get stuck there. So maybe years after, certainly, something like physical abuse or sexual abuse, we hear or smell something, or we're in a certain place. I knew a woman who every time she would walk into a cold, dark basement, like literally her body, even though she was safe as 30-some-year-old woman, her body felt unsafe, as a sensory input that kept the loop open. And she was on, I mean, with our help, she was able to close it. Thank God. That's the beautiful redemptive work of trauma resolution. Um, but until then, she was stuck in a loop. And so that can happen for high performers, right? From these moments that don't even blip on the radar of other people, but are still significant in someone's life. And so I remember one time sitting in a car with someone, and like I said, I have a very musical mind. And I remember this person looked at me and was like, "Hey, who's singing this song on the radio? Like, what artist is this? Who is this?" And I could have told this person, uh, "This is in this key, and the chords are in this arrangement." Wow, listen to how many layers are going on in the chorus. There's so much that I could have told this person about that song, and yet because this person was asking specifically about something that, for whatever reason, I'm still not very good at the names of the artists and the names of the songs, and the specific lyrics. I could not provide that answer. And that for me was a moment of deep, deep, deep shame. And so in a
Yeah.
moment like that, you make a deep commitment, a secret commitment to yourself. I never want to feel this way again. And you look for all kinds of different ways to do that. So all that to say, uh, there are moments of real trauma where a loop was opened and never resolved, that did something deep within us. Not all high performance is terrible. We need high performers. We need people that get things done and big dreams and all that, right? However, we want it to be healthy high performance and not
Yep.
toxic high performance that's causing a wave of destruction. I mean, the classic example, I forget his name now, but the guy who blew up McDonald's, right? Like, whoa, amazing, you
Yeah.
established this franchise, but he lost his family, he lost everything that actually matters in this wake of destruction. And I say that as an image, not as condemnation for him, but as an image for all of us who want to do big and great things. Like, yeah, let's do it without leaving a wake of destruction, because we haven't actually dealt with what's going on underneath.
Yeah. You've brought up so many salient points. First of all, your point about trauma. I have an issue with the small t trauma, right? Because big T trauma is what we all can agree,
Mhm.
right? Yes, that was traumatic. Regardless of where you come from, what your views are, anything, can look at something and say that is horrific and traumatic. And then there are the small t traumas. And the small t traumas are those things that you are describing, the things that we're chronically exposed to, the things that we are not aware of, the things that drive our psychological bus a lot of times on an unconscious or a rather a subconscious level where we react to things like you are explaining, the pressure. I'm almost kind of vicariously feeling the pressure of what you described, where you wanted to answer this question, you wanted to know the answer, but you felt shame instead because there was no way of you in that moment having the resource to be able to just say, I don't know,
Yeah.
right? Which would have been it. But there's these stories and these narratives that we tell ourselves about what happens or who we are if we don't have the answers or if we don't know. What does that say about us?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. And so the other thing that came up for me too, as you were speaking, is the theme of emotional control and the strength that some people equate with having emotional control. And you very eloquently described what happens to you when, or what, at least what was happening to you when you're trying to engage in having that emotional control. It ended up in you feeling shame. And so I'm curious also for you, Wes, and maybe for some of the people that you've worked with in your experience, what's the cost, right? Over time, what is it costing people to continue to try to have control over their emotions? Um, the type of control that I'm talking about is motivated by fear,
Yeah.
fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, shame, all these things. What's what's your experience and what happens and what are the costs for people when they try to stay on that path?
Yeah, for sure. And there's a difference between trying to control and suppress our emotions and what we call self control. Self control is good. Self control is wisdom, right? Self control is a skill that's learned and implemented over time that hopefully we are growing in. But it's not suppressing emotions. And sometimes we hear people, or maybe we ourselves have said, I never get angry, or I never get anxious, this emotional control as if it is. I mean, we say it because it makes us feel strong and like we're on top. However, what happens when we never feel angry about anything, that's actually an issue. There are some things that we need to get angry about, right?
Yeah.
When we never get worried, and there's a reason that we have a stress response system about certain things, like that's an issue. There are things that we should feel healthy
Yes.
stress, activating, encouraging, empowering kind of stress in order to close a loop and do whatever it is that we need to do. And if we never allow ourselves to feel that, a couple things happen. So we create distance with ourselves because we're not paying attention. The truth is, there's something that makes all of us sad. There's something that makes all of us angry. There's something that makes all of us anxious. These typical or classic uncomfortable emotions. And when we are not paying attention, we're missing out on valuable, one, information about where we're at a given moment, but two, an opportunity to grow. Right? If I'm denying the fact I'm not angry right now, what do you mean? I'm not angry. You're angry. Uh, I'm not recognizing that no, actually, there is something that matters. Now, it might be really immature, or it might be something really like righteous and like injustice that needs to be responded to. It could be either one, but I'm never going to know if I don't go there. And I'm missing out on valuable information as well as that opportunity to grow and to
Yeah.
learn again through that lens of self-control how to channel this in the right way versus just ignoring it. So what does it cost people, this idea of suppression? Emotional control is emotional suppression. Well, the ability to really know yourself and to grow yourself,
Yeah.
but also it costs you distance with others, because when you're not willing to recognize it in yourself, you're probably not going to recognize it when it matters most in
Yeah.
the lives of the people closest to you. And I will say this as a trauma therapist, sometimes the invalidation of a caregiver to a young person's abuse is almost worse than the abuse itself. mean, I'll never forget sitting across the couch, sitting across the office from an orange couch, and there's a mother and a daughter, and the daughter had been working for an entire year with me, getting, uh, gaining control of her trauma triggers, really being able through gradual exposure to integrate her trauma into her story. So yeah, it's part of her story, but it's not the defining
Yeah.
part. I mean, just beautiful work. We got mom in finally for a session. We did done prep work for this 15-year-old to tell her mom, "Hey, mom, this is what it was like. I just want you to know what it was like for me." And the mom was completely emotionally invalidating, and
Hmm.
the air went out of the room. I mean, I saw this girl deflate inside. I mean, I had to be there and be professional, but inside I was like, "No, no, no." I had even prepped mom, and mom is unable to recognize how painful and just enter into the experience that was, because mom is uncomfortable with her own anxiety about the situation, right? So
Yeah.
when we are trying to suppress our emotions versus learning how to recognize them and, through the lens of self-control, really really channel them in a wise and a good and a helpful and a beautiful and a just way, it isolates us from ourselves as well as from others.
Yeah. Why are people so afraid of emotions? And I'm not talking about the acceptable ones, right? Happy, joyful, they're kind of the feel good, and lower the temperature in the room a little bit. I'm talking about that. Like, as I think about that story that you just gave us, what makes it difficult? What makes it so difficult for people to um, allow themselves to feel the anger, the disappointment, the all these emotions that we typically want to shy away from? Because what I'm hearing is that that mom had a very difficult time, if not just difficult, she was unable to bear witness to her daughter's pain
Yeah.
for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think there are a number of reasons why we can resist actually just recognizing our own emotions. I think some of it is generational, some of it's cultural, and certainly some of it is environmental, specifically in the resources that we have or don't have growing up. And so, generationally, I mean, there have been different times where there have been different demands, and I think even of my grandparents that grew up in the Great Depression, there were kids in the Great Depression. Like there were, I don't want to say more important things, but it was survival. It was survival. And so when you then raise kids, you're not necessarily going to be as invested in how they're doing emotionally. I mean, you want them to do well, but you don't have those resources, but also just because of your generation, there's this disconnect. Culturally too, this was a family that had to move from one country to another, and so there was that element of survival, right? And just like making the next decision. And guys, it doesn't matter what you feel; just we got to do this, right? As well as culturally, how this particular mother had grown up, no one had expressed interest in her,
Yeah.
it her the resources, the language, nor the tools to be able to recognize and really be able to use as a helpful resource in her life. At the end of the day, like we don't want to ignore emotions, but we also don't want to idolize them, because we have had those moments where we've been completely driven or seen the effects of when someone's like totally driven by their emotions. It's like, well, that's not wise either, So we can't go to those, but we have to identify them. So sometimes culturally, we come from cultures where it's just not talked about, right? And then in our own family of origin and our own experience. And what I mean is that growing up, we can internalize the idea it's not allowed to feel mad. It's not allowed to be sad. We have to be happy all the time, and I even have to catch myself to not inadvertently communicate to my kids, like, you have to be happy for me all the time. I do want to teach them, hey, you're responsible for your attitude. I'm responsible for mine. We get to choose our attitude, right? But I also have to remind myself to, like, we also need to create space. Like, it's okay to feel sad. We just want to increasingly get sad about the right things. It's okay to get angry about the right things in the right ways and for the right reasons, and it's so I like, even as a therapist, as a parent, like I have to remind myself to create space versus like, let's just be happy all the time. Cause of course that feels easier. All that to say, there are these environments that we grow up in where spoken and unspoken rules condition our relationship to our own emotions. And so sometimes we don't know what to do with them and we don't want to feel them. I think the last thing too is that emotions by nature are illogical. And so they feel like they are less controllable. And so that innately, oftentimes it sparks fear.
Yeah, I mean, that's a scary thought, right? The thought of not being able to control something like emotions. And ironically, it is actually the leaning into the emotions and recognizing that you have feelings about a certain thing. That's actually what allows you to then move into potentially a more cognitive place where you can change the thoughts around it and all these things
Yeah.
that we can access later. There's often this fear that if you let that cat out of the bag, you're going to lose control and that's it, right? Your life is over. There's all this catastrophizing, like you were saying before, that happens.
And high performers like control, by the
And
way.
high performance like control. I mean, the thought of losing control is terrifying. And it is one of the things that oftentimes motivates us to try to keep ourselves in check. And so one of the things that I've personally experienced that I know many of my clients have experienced, and it sounds like obviously a lot of your clients have experienced, is the freedom that happens when emotions are treated as signals or pieces of information and not a problem that we need to solve. Like, oh, I'm feeling angry, I need to resolve that, when really that's not it. All anger is a signal
Yes.
that there's something about the situation, something about this person, something about whatever's happening that doesn't feel right. So, can we talk a little bit about what happens when people are able to start reframing? Because I think that's an important piece of information that people need to know.
Yeah. Oftentimes we fear the actual emotion and we want to just like control the emotion when in reality it's always pointing to something else. And I'll just say this to any of your faith-based audience members. God created emotions. He created us capable of feeling things. In fact, in Christian scriptures, God reveals himself through various emotions. Yes, he's rich in mercy and love, is slow to anger, but God does get angry. God's heart breaks over certain things. So all that to say, it took me a long time to see this, but um, the emotions themselves, yes, can easily lead us into all kinds of unhelpful and unhealthy things. And I think that's another reason why we fear our emotions, by the way. But the emotions themselves are just signals to something deeper. And that's where the real work happens. That's where the real magic happens. Because the truth is, sometimes I do get upset about really silly and immature things. Okay. And I can work at the level of, I'm not going to get upset anymore. Or I can say, why am I upset? And that becomes a gateway to really being able to reprogram my mind and my heart in order to live a life where I can feel these things but not be
Yeah.
overcome by these things, you know. And I like to remind people too, what's crazy is that we often think, well, I can just control my emotions. Technically, I mean, if anyone's ever told you be happy, come on, Karen, be happy, why can't you
Good
just be
luck with that.
happy?
Yeah.
We actually don't have direct control over the emotion.
Yeah.
What we do have direct control over is the condition, right? So if I want to cultivate happiness in my life, there are all kinds of choices that I can make about other things, and they'll probably give rise to that, but I can't actually control the emotion. The same is true for the others. Now, you know, we can certainly develop skills to not do damage in our relationships when we are feeling something strong. You're like anxiety, or even in days where sadness is weighing us down. We can develop those skills, but we can't just come on, feel different, right? No,
Hmm.
we've got to follow the signal, do the work really at the deeper level, which takes courage, but is, I mean, I help people be fully alive. You know, it's like a much better
Yeah.
alternative than suppressing or just trying to like hold on to. I mean, I was in college and I remember thinking, oh, if I could just not get mad anymore about this, you know, and I was stuck at that level rather than going to the deeper level.
Right. 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 And actually, while you were describing that, I was also thinking about the energy, not just the emotional, psychological energy, but the physical energy that we don't realize
Yeah.
goes into trying to control. I mean, think about for a second as you are feeling these things, because we do feel them. We might think that we don't feel, but they're there. They're in our bodies. You can almost feel your muscles tensing
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
You can, you can feel your shoulders kind of getting tight, and these are the things that happen to us that we then just see as normal.
Mhm.
And before you know it, we are functioning from a level of anxiety that is way higher than it needs to be, because we are doing all of these things in essence to try to keep ourselves in check. And then I think about what happens when you allow yourself to cry. And I'm talking about, I mean, man, I love a good ugly cry. I'm not going to lie. Like just getting in front of that mirror and be like, oh, just letting it out.
Yeah.
Wow. If you, when you allow yourself to do that, and I'm not suggesting that you need to do that in order to heal or to get better. I'm just saying for me, once in a while, a good old ugly cry is very, very liberating. I feel my body afterwards. There's this fatigue, there's a tiredness, there is this feeling of just of just letting go. And I have come to understand that that is because I had been so tense and so in my brain and so in my head about trying to control a specific situation, that when I finally allowed that release to happen, my body also released all of that tension. And that is where that tiredness and that fatigue, sometimes even sleepiness, would come into play, because I am releasing all of that, all
Yeah.
of this pent up
Great.
energy that I've been using to keep myself tense and in control.
Yeah,
Right.
that's really insightful. Dr. Dan Siegel, writes that emotions are emotion, energy and motion. So long before we're consciously aware of whatever it is that we're feeling, if we've developed the skill to say, "Oh, I'm feeling this right now," even before that, whether we're aware of it or not, it's already firing in our body. Our heart rate's beating faster. We might have a knot in our stomach. Our voice might
Yep.
be getting more intense, all of that. And so, yes, there's a physical emotions are physical. Isn't that crazy? Feelings are physical,
Yep. Yep.
just as much as they are mental.
Yeah, absolutely. And and the truth is that they surface up as signals long before we even acknowledge
Yeah.
that, that they are there. So I wanted to ask you also about the way that you practice. You talk about looking back at our story in order to move forward with agency. And I really love this approach because in my personal experience, also not just me having gone to therapy but also in practicing, that is something that I have found to be really invaluable.
Yeah, William Faulkner, American short story writer, says the past is not dead. It's not even past. And I want to be clear here. None of us live in the past. There is this reality that the past doesn't exist, and yet it's playing out in our interpretations and the way that we see and respond to the world now. And so, what happens is until we're willing to recognize some of our past, we're just going to reenact it, and it feels like patterns. It feels like habits. Feels, I mean, it can get to the point where we say, well, this is just who I am. And yet they're just patterns. And we're reenacting either something that we learned along the way that was modeled for us or was taught to us, or it was just an adaptive response, right, to some kind of pain, some kind of discomfort or distress in our past. So we're just going to reenact it until we recognize it so that we can actually rewrite a better story.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, there are a number of ways that I help people do that. One of my favorite exercises, inventorying your own story, is creating a map, and there are various levels of this map, i- out of like geographically. and socially, relationally,
Mhm.
as well as those moments, both positive and negative, stick out, and creating this together and really deep diving it. And it's amazing what comes to the surface. Again, we're not going back to relive any of it. We're just glancing back to figure out, okay, why do I interpret? Why does this signal get fired? Speaking of emotions as signals now, in this way, I'm still, wow, I'm really getting angry about XYZ. Man, where does that come from? And then we can figure out. And a lot of times there's themes like, oh my gosh, and you sense abandonment from this person. And you sense, you weren't good enough in this relationship as you described it for me. Wow, that really sounds like it was important. It's left a mark. And people go, wow, you're right. And so then we're able to do something in the present, right? We're not reliving the past. We're not living in the past. Also the future. The future doesn't technically exist, right? We only have agency right now. And so I heard this language the other day and I really like it. The past is just a draft and it's either helpful or unhelpful. Given the meaning that I mean, obviously what happened happened, but given the meaning that we make of it in a given moment and the amount of agency it gives us, it's just a draft, right?
Yeah.
Same with
Yeah.
the future, by the way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, context matters, right? And so I'm curious also for you, Wes, this type of emotional armor, that's what you refer to it as, this way of combating, if you will, these feelings that are very confusing, threatening. Tell me a little bit more about emotional armor. I love that term. It can be very empowering, but it can also be scary to think about. So I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about emotional armor and how you came to it and what it means.
Yeah, so armor is meant to protect. Think of
Yeah.
medieval knights,
Yeah.
typical image. And of course, there are all kinds of things that we can use to protect something valuable in our life. And a lot of times, what happens is both our suppression of emotions themselves, as well as using one emotion to mask others, is a way to protect something that feels very vulnerable for us. So let me give an example. We already talked about suppressing emotions, but through, sometimes high performance.
Mhm.
Um, but another way that we do this is expressing anger. It's easier to feel and show anger
Yeah.
than it is to actually admit something else. So they say anger is a secondary emotion, meaning that there's always something primary underneath it. And this, by the way, is why teenage depression often shows up not in like sadness or staying in bed all day, but often in anger.
Yeah.
'Cause it feels, in a strange way, it feels safer to express anger. And so we can do this and we'll just kind of get angry rather than, say, you know what, I'm actually afraid right now,
Yeah.
or I'm actually a little bit hurt right now because of whatever decision was made. That's way more vulnerable and is honestly risky, even though we're not consciously thinking of it as defense. Like it is a defense to just kind of get angry. So we protect something that feels very vulnerable, either by just suppressing or by really masking other things with anger.
Yeah, absolutely. And anger is one of those emotions that, like you were saying before, once you start peeling back the layers,
Yeah.
oftentimes there's a lot of hurt, there's disappointment, there's so many other things, but it's also one of the easier kind of go-to ones because it also keeps people away, right? I mean, when you're angry, especially if you turn up the volume on that anger, it tends to keep people a bit away from you, and that's a way
Yeah,
of protecting yourself too.
totally. It's a repelling force,
Right.
particularly if something feels really vulnerable or a relationship feels unsafe.
Yeah, yeah. And so, Wes, with the emotional freedom framework that I mentioned earlier in the introduction, this is something that you created. It's something that you created to help people experience real change. And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about the framework itself and then what it is, how it helps people shift with whatever it is that's happening with them, whether they are indulging or ignoring emotions. I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about how this emotional freedom framework works and how it helps people to make changes.
So for a long time, I thought that the goal was just to be happy all the time. And
Mm,
that got me really stuck. And so what I realized is that emotions are like food. Now, when I was in my late 20s, I remember I started having some pain in my lower abdomen. Long story short, I go to the doctor and they teach me a new word. They say, Wes, you have diverticulitis. My sister, she's a doctor. She's like, what? You're way too young to have that. But what is that? That's when food in your intestine gets stuck, essentially.
hmm Yep.
And emotionally, the same thing can happen. So I realized, wait, emotions in a lot of ways are like food.
Yeah.
They're meant to be digested, processed, and then whew, move on. Right. And so all that to say, rather than trying to like never feel angry because anger does so much destruction in my life and I know how much I judge other people that are angry all the time. Why would I want to feel angry? Rather than trying to live that way,
Yeah.
there are actually reasons that we need to get angry, the reasons that anger was created to move us into helpful and to address something, not attack a person, but address an issue. And like
Yeah.
that exists for a reason. And so to be able to have not just the language, but the resources to say, okay, I feel angry. I'm gonna write it in a right way, not let it get stuck in my proverbial emotional intestines, but
Yeah.
let it pass through and actually do something good because of it. That is freeing. Same with anxiety. When we learn to complete that anxiety cycle. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about when our nervous system gets activated. This can be a
hmm
response to a thought. This can be a response to something that someone says in front of us. We can get stuck either in a panic or in a paralysis. But again, our stress response system was created to bless us, to protect us, to keep us safe, and to like move us into productive action. So,
Yeah.
we talk about fear as a response to immediate danger. Like, hey, if I'm going too fast on a highway, like, thank God that I'm built with that stress response system that says maybe I should slow down. When we talk about anxiety, that's not immediate danger, that's a perceived threat or danger.
Yeah.
But hey, that can move me into helpful action, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about a deadline, whether we're talking about boarding up your home before a natural disaster, thinking about problem solving down the road, like, hey, what are we going to do for meals next week? Like that blesses you and your family. The stress response system is meant to bless. So if we're trying to convince ourselves, oh, I should never feel anxious, oh man, we're going to get stuck and we're going to be frustrated all the time. So we want to learn how to digest it, use it productively. Same with sadness. When we learn to honor sadness and see that it's actually an indication that our hearts are able to feel,
Yeah.
are able to be connected, are able to love someone or something. Otherwise, we wouldn't have a sense of loss, whether it's a dream, an opportunity, a pet, a place,
Yeah.
or a person. When we're able to honor the sadness, we're able to let it move through and move. I don't want to say move on because that has a lot of baggage when it comes to grief, but we pass through.
hmm
We're able to let it pass through. And so emotional freedom is the ability to feel without being overcome by our feelings. And it sets us up for a life that isn't stuck or frustrated because the truth is we're going to feel all these things. We just want to know what to do with them in ways that move us closer to people and build a better world than the opposite.
Oh, I love that. I mean, I love the visual. Um, I think that example of the digestion is actually kind of perfect because as you're talking about it, I'm thinking about how slow digestion works. And sometimes you might feel a little discomfort when things are not moving or working exactly in the way that you expected them to or that you want them to. Um, and the reason that I feel that it's such a powerful and appropriate imagery is because oftentimes that's how we feel as well when we are trying to, for the very first time, sit with our emotions
Yeah.
and stay present. It's so uncomfortable sometimes to sit with that while we wait for clarity
Yeah.
to emerge. So I really appreciate that visual of just thinking about how we I digest our emotions and let them flow through, and there will be clarity, but it may not always be comfortable. And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's there are also going to be times when you get through it much faster. It's not always going to be hard. It's not always going to be uncomfortable. But in order for you to feel the benefits of allowing this process to go through, you do have to sit with it.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that so much. When we talk about emotional freedom, Wes, I wanted to also ask you about your perspective with regards to the way that it relates to purpose and
Yeah.
faith and self leadership, right? Because we talked about emotional freedom
Yeah.
and how it can internally open things up for us in a way that brings clarity and freedom and liberation psychologically, emotionally. But I'm also curious to hear your perspective about how emotional freedom can change the way that people relate to other things like purpose, like faith,
Absolutely.
like self leadership, or even to other people.
Yeah. It is a signal not just for the condition of our hearts at a given moment, but even for deeper
Yeah.
themes. So emotional freedom, meaning when we're able to recognize, oh, I feel this way and follow the signal, it can really highlight our purpose. I remember living in Brooklyn, New York. This was the summer of 2008. It was with a bunch of people who had graduated college at that point, and I was just subletting for the summer before I had to go back and finish college. But they put on a movie one night, and by the end of the movie, I'm weeping. And it was just one of these silly action movies, and yet it had to do. It was Gone Baby Gone. You probably would, which
Yeah.
which was about protecting children.
Yeah.
And at the time, I was like, "Why is this getting to me? Why am I?" Actually, I didn't think about that. I was just like, "Wow, I'm crying." Years later, I started to realize, no, there was a signal in that moment pointing me to something that was important. And years later, I work with young guys, vulnerable guys in gangs on the streets of Chicago. Years after that, I'm working with in our state we call it DCFS, it's Child Protective Services, and
Hmm.
specifically with these kids and teens who have survived physical abuse, sexual abuse, environmental neglect, domestic violence, what brings cases in and all that. I'm looking back and I'm saying, oh, that signal was trying to get my attention about something that really, really mattered to me. And here's what I would say to those listening. There are themes in your life that fire you up. You're so passionate about them in the best way. There are also things that fire you up that really cause you to lose sleep at night because you worry about them in the best way. There are also things that break your heart because they're so heavy for you, and maybe no one else in your family has the same response, or no one else that in your circle has the same response. But it breaks your heart. Those are signals that can point to purpose,
Yes.
the things that we're passionate about. So emotional freedom, again, being able to recognize the signal, to follow it without, living your life based on it, but just paying attention is definitely connected to purpose. When it comes to faith, there's an author, Dan Allender. He wrote a book, The Cry of the Soul, and he makes the case that every emotion that we feel essentially is a vertical conversation. It happens in a horizontal relationship. So someone does us wrong, we feel angry about it, but really at some level, our soul is asking, God, are you going to respond to injustice? Are you really good? Can we really trust you? And he traces this through anger, shame, despair, jealousy, sadness, even, and that really helped me to recognize, even in a place like the Psalms. In the Psalms, there are these poets that are wrestling with hard things. Like now we're like, oh no, what if someone blocks me on Facebook? Oh no, what if, back then it was like literally these enemies could come and
Yes.
kill all the men and take the women and children captive. Like it was a different level of threat. And what are they doing? They're going to God and saying, hey, I am stressed out about this. When we don't recognize that, we're not going to have those conversations. Our faith is not going to deepen. And so emotional freedom, again, that ability to see the signal and follow the signal is a gateway to deeper faith. And of course,
Yeah.
as I alluded to before, when it comes to self leadership, we want to develop the skill to really channel these things. And if we're trying to ignore them, or we're just kind of going all in and just kind of indulging them, this is just who I am, so you better get used to it. Well, that's not great self leadership, right?
Yeah.
What I found is that when I am able to recognize I'm really, really angry about something, it actually helps me not just name the feeling, but it helps me focus the feeling. Let me give a quick example. Um, there's been a lot to be really upset about recently in our context at the time of this recording. And I remember that some of the activity started here in Chicago. This
Hmm.
months ago, and everyone was posting on Facebook, and everyone was just outrage, outrage, outrage. And of course, the algorithm itself looks for interest, and so is that
Yeah.
eventually everyone becomes a silo, an echo chamber, right? And I was like, I am so like, I was literally losing sleep at night. I'm so upset about what is happening in my city. What do I do about it? Because I'm not just gonna get on Facebook and vent. That's not helpful
Right.
to anyone or anything. And I've done all kinds of unhelpful things when I'm angry growing up. Okay. I could go down that path. What can I do? So what I decided to do was, you know what? I'm going to write an op-ed for the Chicago Tribune. Now it was never, long story short, it was never published. But here's the thing: sitting down, I cried while I wrote this op-ed that was
Hmm.
titled, "I'm a trauma therapist. Here's what ICE is doing to children," based on like literally my clients' experiences. And it was a way to try and be helpful, to try and build something. Again, not attack a person, but address an issue. Hopefully, in my
Yeah.
small, tiny little circle of influence, given things that I've been able to experience or clinical experience that I have, like just be able to channel it. Right now, what does that have to do with self leadership? Because I could have burned a lot of bridges. In fact,
Right.
every day we have to choose to this day to not burn bridges.
Yeah.
Um, and self leadership is being able to say, yeah, I really feel either anxious, or I really feel sad and brokenhearted, or I really feel angry about this thing. And yet I'm going to use this in the best possible way to
Yeah.
build something, to address an issue, to move us, to create a better reality rather than just burn bridges with people and hurt people.
Yeah. So it's purposeful and intentional. And I hear what you're saying. That op ed that you wrote was your way of saying, you know, I have so many feelings about this. I need a way to let this all go. And I'm choosing this way. And it sounds like there was so much emotional release and relief from just being able to do that.
Yeah, and
Right.
it led to much better conversations than just posting an angry
Yeah.
rant on Facebook. Because I did fact check it with some of my friends who like live in Little Village and work with organizations
Hmm.
there. And I only shared it with my family in a group text. I didn't put it on Facebook or any or social media or anything like that. And it led to somewhat productive. I mean, much better conversations than if I had just had some random angry rant.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And again, that purposefulness and that intentionality of keeping it small, all of those things point to that self-leadership that you're talking about. Wes, this has been such an amazing and enlightening conversation. I mean, we both do trauma work, and man, I have held myself back so much because I have wanted to just go down so many rabbit holes with you today. There's so much stuff. You have so much beautiful and helpful and insightful information to share. I am so glad that you came on to share this with us and to share your framework and so many things. One of the last questions that I always have for our guests is, how would you define emotional wealth?
I wondered if that was going to be the. Uh, I think of wealth as resources. So it's having resources, language, frameworks, tools. But I also think of wealth as, I've heard it described when it comes to money. If you stopped working today, how long could you support your lifestyle? That's one of the measures of wealth. And so if something like really distressing happened today,
Mhm.
how resilient, we don't want to suppress, but how resilient would we be in feeling our appropriate emotional response about it is kind of how I think of emotional wealth. Having the resources, having the language, having the frameworks, having the support system to be buoyant. Right? We're not going to be toxically positive, but we do want to be buoyant in the midst of oh man, all kinds of personal family situations, as well as larger contexts globally, nationally, that just want to pull us down and could pull us down if we let them. Being emotionally wealthy is having the resources to continue toward building a meaningful life and creating the life that you were created for, no matter what happens around.
Thank you. I love that. And I am sure that there are people that are going to want to find out more about your work and your perspectives. How would people be able to contact you if they wanted to explore your work a little bit more or just connect with you?
Yeah. I mean, the most direct way would be sending me an email, wes@weskennedy.co. But I think a really helpful place for most people would be peacestartstoday.com. And I'm on socials as well, but those would be the best ways to really get in contact with me.
Wonderful. Wes Kennedy, thank you so much for being here today and for sharing all of your knowledge. I am so grateful. Thank you so much for showing up for all of us.
Thank you, Karen. What an honor. Yeah. And I wish every listener a full day. You got this.
Ah, love that ending message. And thank you all for listening to the Emotionally Wealthy podcast, but more than that, for showing up for yourselves by being here today. And if this episode gave you insight, clarity, or perspective that you needed, or maybe you know someone that could use or benefit from today's episode, please share it. And if you're enjoying the show, of course, please leave a review. That will help more people find these conversations. And until next time, I invite you to stay curious, stay connected, and stay emotionally wealthy. I'll see you next time. Oh, hey, quick reminder for you that this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Always consult a qualified professional with any questions you might have.